How much does it cost to own a 33-foot wooden boat? I'm going to answer that question in today's video. Now let's look at the cost, but before I do that, I want to say what I'm talking about here. I'm simply talking about the costs to maintain a boat year to year here in Maine. And the costs I'm going to be giving are based on what it costs me to maintain my 33-foot wooden boat. I'm going to break those costs up into 5 groups: spring pre-launch work and launching costs, insurance and registration costs, summer mooring costs, fall haul out and fall work costs, and finally winter storage costs. Spring pre-launch work and launching is one of the most comprehensive categories, and it includes quite a bit. I'm going to go into considerable detail. This work is mostly cosmetic, painting and varnishing, but also includes an electrical checkout, engine testing to make sure the engine runs before you launch the boat, testing the bilge pumps, and finally swelling up the hull. Not all of these things cost money, so I'm going to only look at the categories that actually represent an expenditure. They are bottom painting, topsides painting, the hull, trim, and decks, varnishing, and finally launching the boat. Painting the bottom can be a fairly big project. It involves 2 stages. First, prepping the bottom for paint. This usually involves some scraping and sanding with coarse sandpaper. I usually spend about $5 on coarse sandpaper discs for the sanding. Then there's the actual painting. My boat takes a little under 1 gallon of bottom paint. The paint I use costs about $150 a gallon. Bottom paint is expensive. I also use about 25 yards of masking tape to mask along the bottom of the boot stripe so that I don't get paint where I don't want it. And finally, I usually do this job in 2 stages just because it's a fairly big job that involves crawling around under the boat. So I buy a couple of the cheapest rollers I can. They cost about $5, and that's what I use to actually paint the boat. The total for this is $163, and just for reference, it usually takes me about 8 hours to prep the bottom, mask it, and paint it. The next category of spring work is topsides and trim painting. In this category, I have to do a lot of sanding. I have to sand out the topsides and all the trim and anything on the deck that I'm going to paint. So I use a lot of 220 grit sandpaper and sanding discs. Sanding discs usually cost about $5, paper about $3.50. I also have a lot of masking to do, and I have to repeatedly mask as I paint something and then remask when I paint what's next to it. So that takes usually about 120 yards of masking tape for my boat, which costs about $15. I usually use a quart of topsides paint, which runs about $40 for the paint I use. I use foam rollers for the painting, and I usually go through about 2. That's about $1 each or $2. Trim takes about a pint of paint, which costs about $20. And then there's paint thinner and or paint brushes. I tend to use throwaway paint brushes, so they run about $3 to $4 each, and I'll use several of them, and that typically runs about $10, bringing the total for this area to $95. And it usually takes me somewhere around 12 hours to paint the topsides and trim. The next subcategory is varnishing. Again, I have to use quite a bit of sandpaper to sand out all the varnished wood on my boat, which is the cabin house and transom. Usually go through about $3 of sandpaper. There's lots of masking to do because I have lots of windows I have to mask around. So 120 yards of masking tape for another $15. I usually use about a quart of varnish, which is about $35. Some foam rollers to do the transom and the cabin house. Usually go through about 3 of them for $3. Then paint thinner and paint brushes, which I use for tipping the varnish out, another $10 for a total of $66. And like the topsides and trim painting, this takes about 12 hours, largely because the masking takes a long time. The final part of spring work and launching is launching the boat. My boat's a power boat, so the launch cost isn't much. It typically runs $200. I help, which probably keeps the cost down a little bit, and it takes about 1 hour of my time. Just for reference, I also have a sailboat, and they cost quite a bit more to launch because you have to also step the spars, so you tie up the trailer that's used for launching for longer, and the result is that it costs about $600, and since I help, it takes about 3 hours. This brings us to registration and insurance. Maine splits registration costs into two parts: registration fees and excise tax. You can either state register your boat, which is what mine is. That costs $21 for a 33-foot boat with a 40 horsepower engine, or you can federally document the boat, which costs $26. Excise tax for my boat, which is greater than 20 years old and has a 40 horsepower engine, runs $75.20. Insurance is the biggest part of this category, and my insurance runs about $700. So for my boat, I pay $796.20. If the boat was federally documented instead of state registered, it would cost $801.20. It takes me about an hour to go over, do the registration, and then put the stickers on the boat. That brings us to summer mooring costs. Where are you going to keep the boat for the summer? Basically, in Maine, you have two options. Most people keep their boats on a mooring and row out to it in a dinghy, but a few people keep their boats at a marina, so I'm going to go over both. First, I'll look at mooring costs. The first part of mooring costs is the town fee you have to pay to have a mooring. Where I am, it's $140 a year. Then you've got your annual service fees for the mooring. You have to get it inspected periodically. You do have to replace bits and pieces of it every few years. Amortized over time, that works out to about $250 a year. And then, if you keep your boat on the mooring, you have to have a dinghy. And if you have an outboard on it, you have to register it, and you have to have a place to put it. That usually costs somewhere around $30, bringing the total, if you keep your boat on the mooring, to $420. Now, if you keep your boat at the marina, it's quite a bit more money. I'm using the costs to keep your boat at the marina in Southwest Harbor, Maine, because that's where I keep my boat in the summer. A 33-foot boat costs $3,960 to keep it at the marina for the summer season. If you want shore power, that's another $960. My boat doesn't have shore power, so I don't pay that. So marina cost is going to be somewhere between roughly $4,000 and $5,000, depending on whether or not you want shore power. That brings us to fall haul out and fall work. Once again, I'm going to give costs for both my boat, a power boat, and a sailboat. Hauling my power boat out costs $200. If it was a sailboat and I had to have masts unstepped, it would cost about $600. The next step is pressure washing the hull to get any growth that's on the hull off. This typically costs $115 for my boat. Finally, there's fall work. I don't do fall work every year, but when I do, it's replacing a few plank ends, a few punky spots in the hull. Doesn't cost very much, but it does take quite a bit of time. The materials for that are wood for the planking, screws, epoxy, and paint. Typically about $100. But it does take me somewhere in the 20 to 30 hour range in labor to do that work. So total cost for a power boat in the fall for haul out, pressure wash, and any work I do typically runs about $415. If it was a sailboat, it would run about $815. That brings us to the final cost category, winter storage. Basically, you have two options. You can store the boat inside in unheated storage, which is what you want to do for a wood boat, or you can store it outside. Inside storage for my boat runs $1,815 for the winter. If I stored the boat outside, it would run about $1,100, but that would include the cost of covering the boat with a tarp or shrink wrap. Finally, if I had a sailboat, I'd also have to pay to store the masts, and that typically runs about $100. Now we get to the summary of all the costs that I think are essential to maintain a wooden boat here in Maine. I'm going to divide it up into options for a sailboat and for a powerboat. We'll look at the powerboat first. Okay, if you have a powerboat like mine and you store it outside in the winter under cover and you keep it on a mooring for the summer, it's going to cost you roughly $2,885 a year. Now, if you store it outside but you keep it at a marina for the summer, that jumps the cost up a lot to $6,425. Now let's look at what inside storage costs are. If you store inside but keep your boat on a mooring in the summer, it boosts the cost up to about $3,600. And if you store it inside and keep it at the marina, $7,140. Let's consider a sailboat. This is going to be more expensive largely because of the increased haul and launch charges and the fact that you have to store the mast someplace in the winter. Outside storage and keeping the boat on the mooring will run you about $36.85 a year. Outside storage and keeping the boat at a marina will run you about $7,225. It's a lot of money. Inside storage and keeping the boat on the mooring for the summer will cost you about $4,400, and inside storage and keeping the boat at the marina will cost you nearly $8,000. So you can see there's a wide range of costs depending on where you store the boat in the winter and where you keep it in the summer. In Maine, most people keep their boat on a mooring in the summer, and there isn't a huge difference, only about $700 between outside storage and inside storage, so it's desirable to keep the boat inside. So I would say a fair cost to keep a 33-foot wooden powerboat here in Maine is about $3,600 a year. And that's, of course, assuming that you do all the work that needs to be done in a boat yourself. Similarly, with a sailboat, inside storage and keeping it on a mooring for the summer will run you about $4,400. Okay, I hope this summary of actual costs to keep a boat in Maine for the summer is useful to you and gives you a feel for just how little you can get by on, or if you want to go a little fancier, keep the boat at the marina, how much it can cost. There's a huge range of nearly $5,000. Okay, thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, give me a thumbs up. And please subscribe to my channel and click on the little bell symbol when you do to get notification of my next video.